Ryland was a drifter in the vastness of interstellar space. He had dedicated himself to gathering abandoned, lost, and forgotten children from across the endless universe. His ship was filled with orphans from every corner of the stars. Kain, a Drathar with wild eyes that defied the world. Silas, a slim, silent Halya with movements as deadly as they were fast. And Tyra, with skin as tough as armor, slow but fiercely loyal. Each of them came from different species and different worlds, but they shared a common fate. They were all without parents. Ryland's orphanage was a small haven he had built on a distant planet. However, danger was never far in the universe. Ryland had heard rumors that slavers were targeting his orphanage. Leading them was Kain, a slaver whose name was whispered in terror throughout the dark markets of the galaxy. He was fast, ruthless, and wielded his intelligence like a weapon. Ryland knew it was becoming harder and harder to keep the children safe. His own past carried the scars of a dark, dangerous life. But now, he was both a warrior and a protector. As he stared at the control panel of his ship, he realized a choice had to be made. If he was going to stand against Kain, he would need to use all his wits and combat skills. This time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for these children. Kain's fleet was closing in like a threatening shadow. Tension rose within Ryland as the children around him watched him with anxious eyes. In the control room of the ship, red warning lights flashed across the screens, showing that the enemy was getting closer with every second. Ryland could feel the children's fear, but he couldn't let it consume them. These kids were under his protection, and no matter what, he was determined to keep them safe. "All right, everyone to your stations," Ryland said, his voice firm and resolute. "This isn't just a game. You need to stay sharp. Kain, prepare the weapons. Tyra, boost the energy shields. Silas, guard the critical points of the ship. We'll need you." The children quickly went to their tasks. As each of them focused on their jobs, Ryland steered the ship with a sharp maneuver toward the asteroid belt. Kain's ships were closing in. Ryland glanced at the screen, holding his breath. It was time to make a move. The asteroids would provide a natural line of defense, but they were also a deadly obstacle. One wrong move could tear his ship apart. As Kain's fleet rapidly approached, Ryland took a deep breath. "Now," he muttered quietly. He increased the ship's speed and dived into the asteroids. Massive rocks spun around them, the ship shuddering as it wove between them. Ryland's eyes were glued to the screen, his hands gripping the controls. The risk of being crushed was high, but Kain's ships were equally in danger. A few small explosions echoed from outside the ship. "We've lost a few of them," Ryland said, his eyes locked onto the panel with deadly focus. But the real danger was far from over. Kain's flagship was still on their tail. He wasn't just any pirate. He was a clever and ruthless hunter. His ships twisted and turned after Ryland's, mimicking every move like a snake coiling around its prey. Ryland knew this couldn't go on. Against Kain's superior technology, he would need to rely on his intelligence and strategy. This wasn't a race of speed, it was a battle of minds. For a moment, Ryland fell into deep thought. What advantage did he have? The asteroids. He could use them as weapons. Quickly, a plan started to form in his mind. "Kain," Ryland said suddenly, "fire at the asteroid clusters. But don't aim to destroy them, just trigger their collapse. Let them fall onto Kain's ships." Kain rushed to the screen and did as Ryland instructed. The first shot set off a series of large explosions among the asteroids. Massive chunks of rock broke off and began tumbling toward Kain's fleet. The enemy ships tried to dodge, but in such a tight space, it was nearly impossible. 2 ships exploded in a fiery burst. "Nice!" Kain shouted, his eyes gleaming with excitement. But Ryland knew it was too soon to celebrate. Kain's flagship was still intact, and it was now closing in even faster. Ryland noticed a red warning light flashing on the panel. The enemy was charging a massive energy weapon, preparing to fire in a matter of seconds. "Tyra, max out the shields." Ryland's voice was commanding and urgent. Tyra's massive hands slammed down on the panel. The energy shields flickered, strengthened. But this protection wouldn't last long. Kain's ship fired its colossal energy cannon right at them. A massive beam of light shot toward Ryland's ship. When the impact hit, the entire ship shook violently. Ryland was thrown from his seat, but the ship held together. "Shields are down to 50%. Tyra shouted. "That's enough," Ryland said, narrowing his eyes at the screen. The enemy was close now, but it was time to finish this. He swung the ship around in a sharp maneuver. Jakarn's ship was now directly behind them. Ryland opened a small panel inside the ship and pulled out a device. It was a trap, designed to disrupt Jakarn's signals. He had one shot to deploy it. "Silas," Ryland said, "you're the fastest. You need to plant this on the enemy ship's hull. But be careful, it's going to be dangerous." Silas nodded slightly and quickly sprang into action. His slim body moved through the ship like a ghost. Moments later, he was out of the airlock, leaping toward the enemy vessel. He found a weak spot near the energy lines and planted the device. Then, just as swiftly, he returned to the ship. Suddenly, explosions erupted inside Jakarn's ship. The systems Ryland had sabotaged were failing, and Jakarn's ship was now defenseless. Ryland turned to the children and said, "Now it's time to finish this." Kain fired the laser cannons once more. This time, the shot hit perfectly. Jakarn's ship shattered into pieces, the remains scattering into the depths of space. A deep silence settled over the ship. The children looked at Ryland with gratitude in their eyes. Once again, they had survived, but Ryland knew this victory was only temporary. In the darkness of space, there would always be new dangers lurking. As Ryland watched the wreckage of Jakarn's ship, he was far from feeling the satisfaction of victory. The metal fragments slowly drifting through space after the explosion were a reminder that this war was not yet over. The main enemy ship had been destroyed, but Jakarn was still alive. Ryland knew all too well how cunning and ruthless he was. Jakarn wouldn't give up this easily. A signal from Jakarn's ship triggered Ryland's instincts. Red lights flashed on the screen, indicating that an escape pod had been launched from the enemy ship. Jakarn was escaping. Ryland wasn't going to let this chance slip away. "Kain, lock onto the pod," Ryland shouted, his eyes fixed on the screen. Kain swiftly directed the ship's laser cannons toward the pod. But for a brief moment, Ryland hesitated. When Ryland boarded Jakarn's escape pod, he was met with the cold, calculating stare of his enemy. Jakarn sat there with a grin, as if everything had gone according to plan. The tight space of the escape pod only intensified the tension between the two men. Silence lingered for a moment, broken only by the faint hissing of the pod's mechanical systems. "So you've finally arrived, Ryland," Jakarn said in a calm voice, his eyes analyzing Ryland's every move. "You always think you're one step ahead, but this time things have changed." Ryland aimed his weapon at Jakarn, but something didn't feel right. This was a man who had spent his life crafting ruthless plans and surviving every battle. Ryland knew a trap could spring at any moment. "We end this here," Ryland said. "The moment you went after the kids, you signed your death warrant." Jakarn's grin widened. "Oh really? And what if this is just the beginning? You have no idea that you're the prey." His voice carried a taunting challenge, with an underlying threat. Ryland took a step forward, but at that moment, Jakarn subtly pressed a button under his seat. Suddenly, the red lights inside the pod began flashing. Ryland was instantly on high alert, quickly realizing what was happening. The pod was programmed to self-destruct. This was a death trap. "The pod's going to blow, Ryland. You and we're ending this war right here. But the kids, for them, this is only the start. The moment they think they're safe under your protection, I'll be back," Jakarn said, his voice low but filled with menace. Ryland's anger boiled inside him, but he couldn't let it cloud his judgment. Without a second's hesitation, he moved swiftly. He struck the side of Jakarn's chair with his weapon, stunning him. In that instant, Ryland tossed the gun aside and lunged at Jakarn, closing the distance in seconds. Fists flew, and the two men engaged in a brutal fight within the confined space of the pod. Jakarn, with years of experience, put up a fierce resistance, but Ryland's rage and protective instinct were stronger. When he finally overpowered Jakarn, there were only minutes left until the explosion. Ryland quickly subdued him and rushed to the pod's control panel. As an engineer, Ryland knew it was impossible to stop the detonation. But he still had a chance to escape. He quickly input a series of commands, opening the emergency exit of the pod. Dragging Jakarn's unconscious body with him, Ryland managed to get out. As Ryland and Jakarn exited the pod, the detonation mechanism inside the pod ticked down to its final moments. Holding Jakarn's limp body, Ryland leaped toward his ship. He had to move fast. In a few seconds, the pod would explode in a blast that would engulf the entire area. As soon as he reached his ship, he shouted at the kids, "Full power! Get us out of here now!" Tyra and Kain heard the urgency in Ryland's voice. They pushed the ship's engines to their limits, speeding away. Behind them, a massive explosion erupted. The escape pod disintegrated in a blinding flash of light. Debris scattered through space, but Ryland finally felt they had reached a safe distance. He took a deep breath and glanced down at the wound on his hand, then turned to Jakarn's lifeless body. Jakarn was still unconscious but alive. Ryland tossed him into a corner of the ship and turned to the kids. They all looked as if they had won a great victory, but Ryland's mind was on one thing. This victory was temporary. Jakarn was only one piece of the puzzle. There were other dangers lurking in the dark corners of space that threatened these kids. Ryland composed himself and offered a reassuring smile to the children. "We're safe," he said slowly. "But this is just the beginning. You're all warriors now, and you'll learn to survive in this world." Silas, Tyra, and Kain looked at Ryland with gratitude. This fleeting victory had bonded them as a family. Each of them, now united under Ryland's protection, was more closely connected than ever before. But in Ryland's mind, one thought remained: the future. More threats could be waiting for them in the darkness of space. But Ryland swore once again that he would protect these kids, no matter the cost. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.